Well, here now are Julia Unwin. She's the Chief Executive of the Joseph Rowntree Foundation, which looks at poverty in the UK, and Sam Bowman, Deputy Director of the Adam Smith Institute think tank. Welcome to you both. Now, this whole idea of an integrated tax and benefit system was sort of built up, really, by Gordon Brown, both as Chancellor and then as Prime Minister. Is what we're seeing a reversal of that, a sort of different philosophical approach, do you think?
No, I think what we're seeing is the building up of universal credit, which comes precisely from that background, which is you try and make the movement from work into and out of work as smooth as possible to incentivise people going into work. Of course, going to work must be the best thing people can do. But our current labour market is very uncertain, very precarious. People go in and out of work, never out of poverty. And we need a benefit system that supports them in doing that, in the hope and expectation that they will stay in work long-term, work where they can make their lives and support their families.
And presumably if you do that and you cut credits in work benefits, then people have less at the end of the day.
Well, that's true, yeah. If you cut credits without cutting taxes, then you're disincentivising work. You're reducing what you get when you go in. And the Prime Minister said today that we should be moving away from a system where we're taxing people and then giving them benefits back. And I think that's right. But the problem is we're not cutting taxes at the same rate that we're cutting benefits. And if we just take this approach that just looks at the deficit and doesn't try and reduce the cost of living by making supply-side reforms and doesn't try and focus big tax cuts on the working poor, and that means national insurance thresholds being risen as well as raising the personal allowance, then I think we're going to leave people worse off and we may disincentivise work.
I mean, the poorest people are not paying income tax. Under 10,000 you're not paying income tax.
Paying national insurance.
But they are indeed paying national
insurance.
And they're paying very regressive consumption tax because actually the costs for an average household are much greater the poorer you are. Because a bigger proportion of your spending goes on food and fuel and expensive items.
But if we're talking about incentivising work, then making work pay is the best way to do that. We both agree about that.
Absolutely agree with that.
And the easiest way to do that is to raise the national insurance threshold, hopefully actually peg it and the personal allowance to the minimum wage rate, so that part-time minimum wage workers aren't paying tax at all. And I think the rhetoric that we heard today was sound. The actual results that we're going to see are probably less so.
Would you agree with that?
I would. I don't think that raising the personal tax allowance is a very efficient way. It's a very expensive way of helping
What
poor people
about moving up with the minimum wage? I mean,
well, we certainly need to increase the minimum wage to honour the commitment that was made, the tripartite committee between industry, trade unions and government, to keep the minimum wage at a level which people can afford to live on.
Well, suggestion moving towards the living wage.
Yes, and I'm sure that's the right thing to do, and both of us would agree on that as well.
No, certainly not. It's a terrible idea. The minimum wage, we know, there's a huge amount of empirical evidence. This isn't just theory, this is evidence that the minimum wage cut causes jobs. Yeah, it hits jobs. There is no magic wand to
Well, with all due respect, I mean, I remember when it was introduced and people said it was going to cost 3 million jobs, and it didn't.
That's true, but
we've got very high levels of employment now.
But we have over 100 very, very good economic studies that, as one data point, but we have studies that look at different US states where one has risen the minimum wage and one hasn't, that make very, very sophisticated approaches. And most of them, not all of them, but most of them show that the minimum wage does cost jobs. And there really is no magic wand that we can use to boost incomes and work.
There is no magic wand, but if 4 out of 5 people who start work lowly paid are still lowly paid 10 years on, we've got to do something about the productivity of British industry so that those people can earn more and can progress in companies where they can make their way.
We're not only talking about that. I mean, we are, if the minimum wage goes up, but we're also talking about the public sector where nearly half people work. So.
Yes, who are contributing to making the country work. We do need to make sure that people can live lives without being entirely dependent on benefits. Currently, the benefit system is underpinning some pretty low-paid jobs.
So if this 12 billion is going to be found, we're told, from welfare cuts, is that fair? Is that anti-egalitarian, a fairer society?
I think it depends where the axe falls. Focusing on tax credits alone, I think, is a bad idea. Housing benefit could be cut if we built more houses. The government could do that very easily.
Overnight, though,
but it can reform planning, and the cost of housing will fall pretty quickly, because the cost of houses now, people will know that they'll be less valuable in 5 years, so it will fall now. So that would work. But even on the minimum wage point, lots of people who receive tax credits get child tax credits, and they don't earn the minimum wage. Raising the minimum wage won't do anything for them. The best thing we can do for people like that is reform childcare regulations so that it's cheaper to send your kid to a creche, it's cheaper to get childminders. And the UK has the UK has the strictest childcare regulations in Europe, much stricter than Germany or Denmark or Sweden. And we really don't have anything to show for it. Those countries don't have terrible childcare systems, but we just spend much, much more.
Is it fair?
There's no doubt that childcare needs a lot of expenditure to get it going so that people can go to work. Nobody will go to work and leave their children unless they feel safe and confident. We need a good, properly supported childcare system. We need to build more housing, and we need some of that to be subsidised for people who will never be able to buy. That takes time. Is it fair? We've been arguing for decades that you need to reform welfare. Of course you do. You need to make it fit for the modern economy. If you try and do it in a rush, you knock out 10% of the benefit system, in an announcement to be made in a fortnight's time, you're playing with fire because you're risking the lives of some very poor people.
I mean, there are people who say on the right that the fair thing to do would actually be to not ring-fence pensioners.
I think that's key.
Yeah.
I mean, the pensions budget this year is £92 billion, and the triple lock means that even though inflation is zero, and wages have risen very strongly this year, so we're increasing pensions by probably about 2.6% this year, looking at how wages are growing so far. I mean, that's incredible. There's no increase in the cost of living, but we're still committing to massively increase the pensions budget. Freezing that, just dropping the triple lock and looking at inflation alone would allow us to freeze the pensions budget. That's a huge saving.
And there also
currently, the way the cuts are proposed, it will impact on working-age adults.
Yeah, and is that fair?
No, I don't think it's fair when we have an economy which doesn't provide for stability in work.
What about the end austerity marches at the weekend? I mean, they would say that you can make this up by increasing taxes at the top end, or the better off.
I don't think that's something I'm equipped to even talk about. What matters is how you divide up the benefits bill as it is now and how you plan for a future. You can't do these things short term. You could plan in just the way that Sam's described.
Thank you both very much indeed on that note of agreement. Thank you.
Israel and Palestinian militant groups both broke international humanitarian law during the Gaza conflict last year. The United Nations says each side's actions may have amounted to war crimes.
The most that we can hope for out of this long and arduous process of inquiry is that we will push the ball of justice a little further down the field, particularly by calling on governments to stand